Welcome back. 10 years later, the impact of Bernie Madoff is still being felt here on the Suncoast. In all, 63 of Madoff's victims were from Sarasota County. Only Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, and Broward had more victims in Florida. 5 years ago, the Justice Department set up a $4 billion compensation fund to at least pay back victims some of the money that they lost. But as of now, victims have not received a penny, although the firm that's supposed to be distributing the money has been paid $39 million. Joining us for more on the Madoff scheme and payback is for the victims is Gabriel Hammond, an investment advisor at Cumberland Advisors, and Mark Gordon, deputy managing editor of the Business Observer. And Mark, let me start with you because you were here when this happened and were reporting on it. What was that like? I mean, did you talk to some of the victims? If so, what did they say?
I talked to some victims. We didn't write a tremendous amount of stories about it at the time, but I was here, and you know, especially nonprofits and charities really got impacted by this, that they were counting on some of those, not only those funds, but donations from other people that lost some money were not able to donate to those nonprofits. And
that's what I was going to ask you, Gabriel, because you work with them. And in fact, I was just telling you before the break, I have a cousin who runs a nonprofit foundation, and he was impacted because many of his largest contributors were impacted.
Alan, it was terribly unfortunate, and the reason why Bernie Madoff targeted nonprofit institutions across the country is because they have a mandated minimum 5% payout of their net assets to whatever charitable activity they're engaged in, and so they like to maintain spending below that 5% minimum. So somebody like Madoff looks at that and says, well, gosh, they're not going to be withdrawing their money anytime soon from me because they're going to try to spend less than 5% per year. So they're excellent candidates for my scheme.
Mark, is there any way to determine or talk about how many of those victims have done since then? I mean, Vern Buchanan talked about some people who were almost completely wiped out. Is that a common story?
I think it's somewhere between common and frequent. You know, it's in that middle range there where it is happening to people where they've been wiped out of almost all their savings.
And what's been the process like for them to seek restitution? Now, you know, we're talking about, and in fact, we'll talk more about this government program administered by the Justice Department in the next segment. But were there a lot of different programs that victims could go to? Did they seek attorneys? What was that process like?
Well, there are multitudes of different types of folks who were defrauded by Bernie Madoff. Some were direct clients of his firm that placed their personal assets directly with Bernard Madoff securities. Others worked through intermediaries. They were courted by intermediaries in Florida and other states around the country, and they invested money that ultimately made it into Bernard Madoff's investment company, through feeder funds, funds of funds that charge multiple layers of fees.
We have less than a minute left, but is it possible to say of the victims here on the Suncoast, how many were direct investors and some were ancillary, so to speak?
I think it would lean more toward feeder funds, and I think that's, Gabriel commented as well, but that's a big chunk of his money came from, in Florida, came from those feeder funds. People hearing, hey, I did really great with this Madoff guy, you got to invest too, and you'll make 10% a month just like I did.
The most victims in Florida were from Palm Beach, obviously, where he had lived. It was over 1,000. I would imagine a lot of those were direct investors.
Well, look, here's what happened. Bernard Madoff would donate $1 million, $50,000, $100,000 to a nonprofit, and then he'd be placed on a podium, and the board of directors would praise him for his philanthropy and also praise his investing skills. So he used his position in the community and abused it.
Right. We are just getting started with this conversation, and we'll pick it up right after we check the weather. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the victims of Bernie Madoff following an inquiry by Suncoast Congressman Vern Buchanan. The Justice Department is committing to review the distribution of $4 billion of aid for those impacted by Madoff's Ponzi scheme. Our guests tonight are Gabriel Hammond of Cumberland Advisors and Mark Gordon of the Business Observer. So let's get people up to snuff in terms of these different programs. There's one that we're talking about tonight, but there was another one. And Gabriel, if you could explain what the difference was.
Yeah, how the story's been presented in local media has sort of obscured other layers of the onion. In total, Madoff victims are out about $17.5 billion. That's the initial principal that was invested with Bernie Madoff. And then over the years, they thought, his investors thought that that had accumulated returns and upwards of $65 billion. So we're talking about $17.5 billion. That's what people need to be paid back now. There are two different funds that have been set up. One was set up right after the Madoff Ponzi scheme was discovered in 2008. That fund was set up in 2009, and a total of $11 billion has been placed in that fund, and $9 billion has been distributed to investors who were hurt by Madoff.
Direct investors.
Direct investors, and those are investors that walked into his office, liked what he had to say, and wrote a check to Bernard Madoff Securities.
So the majority of victims that are out there who have not been compensated yet are the victims of the feeder funds. Is that correct, Mark?
That's my understanding of it. Yes, feeder funds are the majority of them.
Okay, here's the several billion-dollar question. Why is it taking so long to start doling out that money to the victims here?
Well, it's actually contrary to the communications that are coming out of the congressman's office. It's actually par for the course on how long the funds, how long it's taking the funds to be distributed by those hurt by the scheme. The first fund that was established in 2009, it took a while for that to fire up, and it's given out $9 billion. This next fund was established much later in 2013, and you have to keep in mind that this law firm that's overseeing the distribution of this $4 billion has received over 65,000 requests for compensation. That takes years and years of man and woman power to look through that paperwork and find out if this person should be compensated or if this person should be compensated. So we're 4 years out and from the establishment of that first fund, and I think we'll start seeing money flow in the next 3 to 4 months.
That's good. Mark, where does this money come from? This is not just government money that's being sent aside to aid victims here. The money has to come from somewhere.
Right, and some of it comes from a restitution pool of funds. I think that's probably where the majority of it comes from.
Well, so where does that restitution funds come from? Was the government able to recoup some of Madoff's money, and if they did so, from who?
It's an interesting backstory. So this $4 billion fund, the money comes from two different sources. The first source is from a gentleman who lived in Florida, one of Madoff's largest investors. This individual, for instance, put in $10 million 20 years ago, and he took out a few $1 billion from Madoff. Keep in mind that few $1 billion of profits was actually other people's money. So the government said, sorry, that's not your money, and took, when he passed away just recently in the last few years, settled with his estate, and his estate provided over $2 billion, $2.5 billion to this fund of $4 billion. And J.P. Morgan, the bank where Bernard Madoff himself placed his monies and placed his business's monies, other people's money really, settled with the federal government because the federal government said you should have had procedures in place that would have indicated that this was a Ponzi scheme and make it right.
Mark, what has happened in terms of regulatory oversight to prevent something like this from happening again?
You know, I think there's definitely been some laws that have been passed to try and weed this out from happening again. But if you look back at the Madoff scandal, there were laws in place, and there was even whistleblowers calling the SEC and calling other agencies saying, hey, look at this guy, not on the up and up here. But I think like anything else, when something like this happened, government tends to say, we have to pass laws to fix it.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. Even back then when it was happening in terms of the Securities and Exchange Commission, they are underfunded and undermanned. Have things gotten any better there since?
I would say no on that front, for sure.
And Gabriel, we talked in Ray's story about what you as an investor can do to make sure this does not happen to you. What is the most important element of this?
Look, unfortunately, Sarasota, Florida, and Florida in general, because of our aging demographic, is ground zero for those who may be victimized by fraudulent individuals operating in the securities space. And what folks can do is ensure that when they invest their money, particularly with smaller operators, smaller firms, that a third party, as Mr. Lyons had said in the recorded version, that a third party is issuing statements in addition to the statements that the firm in which you are invested with is issuing statements. So you need two sets of statements and make sure they look alike.
Is it also important and crucial that you don't have all your money in one pot?
I mean, I'm certainly not a financial advisor with the expertise that Gabriel has, but yes, diversify is what all financial planners and advisors would tell you. And, you know, I think the advice that we all know, if it's too good to be true, it probably is, would be a big one.
But because when this was all unfolding, I mean, a lot of Madoff's investors were extremely wealthy. I mean, did they have the majority of their investments with Madoff? Did they not know that basic rule of thumb when it comes to investing is diversify?
Look, there's some unfortunate aspects of human nature, and one is greed. And when you start seeing a return every year of 10, 15, 25%, you can't help but say, why aren't we putting more money with Madoff?
And that's what happened. I could only imagine what was going on around here when this was all unfolding. I mean, as we reported, Sarasota County was the fourth largest area, Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, Broward.
Right.
There are a lot, and that's just Florida. There are a lot of victims in a lot of places.
And then soon after that, there was the Art and Adele scandal, and people called that the mini Madoff, and we've written probably more about that than we have on Madoff, but there was obviously a significant number of victims in this area from that.
Gentlemen, hold on one second. We are going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about Friday's topic, an analysis of the week in Washington. Welcome back. Will the victims of Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme finally get what they were owed? Our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. Vern Buchanan is pushing the Justice Department on this. Why do you think he, in particular, is doing it now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely, as we mentioned, there's 60 some odd people in Sarasota that were victimized by this, haven't gotten their funds back. But I think also Congressman Buchanan probably hears that the Democrats are targeting him in 2018 election, and this is something where he can get in front of all his constituents and really all of Florida and say, hey, I'm doing something to help these victims.
But let me ask you this, because a lot of people here are still struggling through an economy that has not fully recovered. And when you talk about the Madoff victims, you're talking about the wealthiest of the wealthy, and a lot of just average people on the Suncoast may not have a lot of sympathy for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we talked about in the beginning is that some of this goes back to charities and nonprofits, and I think in the Congressman's letter he mentions that some of these are, letter to the Justice Department, that these are nonprofits he's looking out for as well.
Gabriel, what else should we make of that?
Look, there's a backstory to everything. We're entering political season again. 2018 is coming up. Folks are running for re-election. Unfortunately, the Congressman's track record on financial regulation and consumer protections in the financial marketplace has very little overlap with the supposed concern he's expressed for the victims of Bernie Madoff. We've now seen the Congressman twice vote to repeal the Department of Labor's new fiduciary rule, which would compel financial advisors to put their clients' best interests first. So I'm not sure how you can write a letter to the Justice Department saying we need to get Bernie Madoff's victims compensated immediately while voting to roll back regulations that protect consumers. So you got to pick which side you're on this issue.
Right, and not only that, we have the other issues in terms of Dodd-Frank, other regulations and laws that went into effect after the financial collapse, which Congress is trying to repeal.
Well, as Comey was testifying in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, over on the other side of the building in the House of Representatives, they voted to repeal and roll back all the regulations that were put in place to prevent another financial crisis from happening.
That's just great. Gentlemen, thank you very much. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about Friday's topic, the week in Washington. On Friday, President Bush appeared to confirm a report, President Trump, I'm sorry, a few presidents ago, appeared to confirm a report that Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller is investigating him for obstruction of justice. Trump tweeting, "I am being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director." A witch hunt. We asked you what you thought about the situation. Thomas Heatley writes, they've got nothing on Trump. Witch hunt. Dems are embarrassing themselves. Sandra Bridges writes, so much winning under 3 federal investigations for collusion and obstruction. So much winning, except this is so-called president does so much whining. And Catherine Cameron writes, the government loves to spend our money instead of actually fixing America's problems. Trump issues, Clinton issues, America falling apart at the seams. Well, what do you think about the victims of Bernie Madoff and the delays by the federal government to get them money? Join the conversation by visiting our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to both our guests for being here tonight. Gabriel Hammond is an investment advisor at Cumberland Advisors, and Mark Gordon is the deputy managing editor of the Business Observer.